Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to contribute to this very important bill, an act to amend the Sexual Offences Act, Chapter 11, 28. Please permit me, Madam President, to use the opportunity to also thank the Honourable Political Leader, Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar, for placing confidence in my ability to represent the United National Congress in yet another role. Madam President, my journey into activism began very accidentally when a playdate with my daughter resulted in the little girl coming to me and saying, "Auntie, I've been raped." I had said to her, one, do you know I now have to report it? Two, did you tell your teacher? I started to ask her questions. And people said to her, when you started to question her, "You're joking, you're looking for attention." And that began my journey, because it was beyond me that we could laugh it off, play it off, think that she's just seeking attention. In my view, if someone said that just to seek attention, then give them the attention they need. So that was my journey, my start. So of course, to be asked to sit in the Senate today and to then hear that this is the bill that's being amended, you can understand that I could only call this God's providence. So thank you to the Attorney General for bringing such an amendment. It is a bill that is dear to me. Madam President, now that I've given you that bit of context, it is my hope that you'd understand why my first point of contention with this bill is actually the consequential amendment to the Children Act, Chapter 4601. Of course, many great points have already been raised in this debate, so I will try my very best not to commit the offense of tedious repetition in my maiden contribution. Firstly, where the bill deals with the punishment of those who commit the act against children, which would be clauses 44A, subsection 2, and as my colleague, Senator Sobers and Senator Dialsing, they both raised the concern that the penalty for an act committed against children certainly cannot be the same as an act committed against an adult. I think it's fair to say that in certain forms of adult entertainment, in today's culture, it's common and fairly accepted. That same entertainment with children, I hope and I think, still brings on a certain amount, a fair amount of public rage. So that alone is an indication to us that we must ensure that our legislation reflects the differences and the severity of the act being committed against children versus adults. Madam President, through you, I would like to recommend to the Attorney General, the Honourable Attorney General, that the penalties suggested in clauses 44A, subsection 2 of the Children Act be increased to send a strong message that voyeurism will not be tolerated against children in Trinidad and Tobago. And I would like to add that once, of course, the National Registrar of Sexual Offenders becomes fully operational, that in the Act, we ensure that that forms part of the penalty. Perpetrators of such an act, various stakeholders, I know myself as a parent, I need to know. I think that this Senator Lakshmi Dayal called this act an act of sexual abuse. I think anyone that commits this act against children is guilty of committing an act of pedophilia. So we need this to go into that registrar. Our stakeholders must be aware, our teachers, everyone must be aware of these perpetrators. Staying on the sections which relate to penalties, which are sections 22A, B, C, and of course subsection 3 in all those cases, I wonder if these penalties would lead to an overall improvement in our society. and I know that this has been something raised. Of course, just the last presenter spoke about that culture issue. The late Desmond Tutu, he urged us that we must not simply pull people out of the river, but we must go upstream and we must find out why they are falling into the river in the first place. And there comes a time when we simply must say enough is enough. And these laws that try to take into consideration our culture, sometimes we need to look at our society and we need to say, maybe, just maybe, some parts of our culture has not served us well. And we have to take that bold step to say enough is enough. Permit me at this time, Madam President, to read an excerpt on voyeuristic disorder, which of course that term was raised by Senator Dialsing. It's an article dated January 4th, 2022, so it's very recent, and it was published in Psychology Today. I quote, Madam President, "No specific cause has been determined for voyeuristic disorder. However, certain risk factors tend to coincide with a person becoming a voyeur, including substance abuse, sexual abuse, and being hypersexualized." Of course, that speaks to us going upstream and looking for the causes. So we must try to match one with the other and figure out how can we prevent. And this is where we need to get to as a society. Sorry, that was an end quote. I'm quoting again now. "Voyeurs rarely admit themselves to treatment, but may be referred by a parent, spouse, or the legal system when they're caught breaking the law. Treatment for voyeuristic disorder typically involves psychotherapy, support groups, and medication. Early treatment may also include the voyeur socially appropriate behaviors, teaching the voyeur, socially appropriate behaviors, such as respecting others' privacy and training them to avoid locations where they will be more tempted to engage in the act." End quote, Madam President. The article further went on to suggest various treatments, possible causes, etc. But from this article and from all the various contributors here today, what is clear is that these clauses must empower the courts to not only administer justice, but a type of discipline that would leave our perpetrators in a better mental state and thereby benefit society as a whole. Our law must go beyond seeking to protect the most vulnerable, but treat and help heal those who in the first place we failed because they were once the most vulnerable and they've now become the perpetrators. So we must move past just protecting the vulnerable, but admit that sometimes we fail them and we are prepared to say, "I'm sorry, we're not going to just call you a monster and lock you up in jail, but we are going to commit to healing." And that's where I would like to see our laws push that type of sentencing. Too often, it's lock you up and throw you away, forget about you. Through these laws, we would like to see an official diagnosis of voyeurism disorder so we can determine whether it's one-off, how far it is, etc. And Senator Dialsing would have spoken about that, so I will move on from that point very quickly. But one thing that is clear, I do think, and I would urge all my colleagues here today, that we do have an opportunity to pass law that would really, really see a better society. When one person is abused, whether we want to admit it or not, if we failed one, we failed all. One person impacts the entire of society in some form or fashion. Madam President, with your permission, I now move on to clauses 5, section 22A, B, and C, subsections 3, and the consequential amendment of section 44A, subsection 3 in the Children Act, where the bill deals with exceptions. Again, of course, coming this late into the presentation, we would have had a lot of discussion. I know divorce proceedings came up, teachers recording in school came up, people relieving themselves in bathrooms, and I've had many different examples, very similar. So permit me, Madam President, to just give some of my examples. Imagine a former beauty queen having her personal acts leaked to the public, and while in the hands of our law enforcement officers, their viewing moves from lawful execution of their duty towards personal gratification, quite subconsciously. It's a human thing. Even though its viewing is permitted for purposes of the investigation, it is my humble opinion that this clause be amended to allow for a conscious or subconscious addition to the purpose. We see a similar handling of public meetings, and you all know I know about protesting. We see a similar handling of public meetings in the Summary Offences Act, whereby any public meeting that turns into a march, you now commit an offense. You went there, you thought you were in a public meeting, you didn't need the permit, but for whatever reason, if this public meeting becomes a march and you have no permit, you've now moved from a very legal activity to committing an offense. So there must be something in these exceptions generally, and I mean, we see it in clauses A, B, C, and whatnot. So I'm not going to go through each one. But there must be something that allows for us moving from, okay, this is what it was designed for. If you find yourself moving into personal gratification, cease or realize you're moving into an offense. And I would suggest, I mean, I am not a lawyer, but I would suggest, maybe words like solely, and I know that, I support the committee stage idea as well, so we can flesh it out there. Madam President, I'd like to clarify how the Attorney General envisions subsection 3C2 working. I know Senator Sobers raised this, so I'm just going to give a little twist on it. I will quote just this section. In premises where there are signs prominently displayed informing persons that the premises or designated portions of the premises are under surveillance. Permit me to, again, use an example to explain my concern. What if my partner, at the time, has a general sign outside his home, as many of us do, premises under surveillance? At that time, it didn't dawn on me that the bathrooms would be under surveillance. Would he be within his right to assume I gave consent, considering he had a sign letting me know that the house was under surveillance? And with a partner, it may be more than just relieving yourself. Picture a lady having a shower. How would the courts treat with the issue of his word against mine? With me, yes, okay, there's a reasonable level of me thinking I have privacy, but then he gets to say, but I put a sign. She should have known that my house has cameras. So I would be interested in hearing from the Attorney General as to how we would deal with that. And possibly, I may have a suggestion, can we replace where we see consent, can we possibly include the word written? Because our last presenter would have said, we are in an age where, and many people said it, this idea of sharing, taking pictures, it seems to be very commonplace. What we would have defined as private years ago just does not seem to be private anymore. I have a 2-year-old and she runs around in diapers. And we do not take pictures of her in her diapers because she's female. And it just seems to us that that's inappropriate. Having said so, there are diaper pictures with little girls exposed all the time, and it seems to be cute. So we definitely see that there is a very vast difference in our perceptions and in what we define as this privacy. So, that reasonable expectation of privacy could very well be vague for the year 2022. What is reasonable to me clearly is not reasonable to some. One final point on these clauses, Madam President, but this time specifically as it relates to 44A, subsection 3A of the Children Act. I wonder if a person with responsibility for the child, that's the quotation, So it speaks of a parent, a guardian, or a person with responsibility for the child. Can this be defined further? Or, of course, the Honorable Attorney General can clear it verbally. Does this line allow for teachers during school hours, for example? Because we would have heard the parent, the teacher with the taking pictures from Senator Dialsing. I'd be definitely interested in knowing exactly who are these people, and of course, maybe we should flesh out some examples, really give this bill. And I understand the Honorable Attorney General's plight with, the need for perfection sometimes stops any sort of execution, But we certainly, is such an important bill. We really, really, really need to spend the time to flesh these things out. We do not want loopholes. I mean, in working things out, even with my own self, I thought to myself, in the situation with the police officer, what if he just puts his hand up in the air and you have a really good defense lawyer and says, but the law said he was allowed, even though it's admitted, he's not even trying anymore, but the law said I'm allowed because we realized that there was a loophole, And finally, Madam President, my final question to the Honorable Attorney General deals with 22A1, where it states, and I read, subject to subsection 3, a person commits the offense of voyeurism if, for the purpose of obtaining sexual gratification for himself or another person, or causing humiliation or distress to a person he knowingly, and of course the act goes on to list everything. My question, Madam President, is this. Inasmuch as we've taken the time to define private act, private parts, sexual act, and so on, should we also consider at this point defining personal sexual gratification? And of course, we've just heard that there is a huge burden of proof. Maybe it is time for us to just be detailed. I know the lawyers will have to guide as to why, but certainly as a mother, as a female, we want protection. And these laws don't seem to give it to us, They don't seem to get the desired outcome because it's just too vague, and there are great lawyers that seem to be able to find loopholes. I want to just give one more example as to why I feel it important to define. I taught a sexual education class a few years ago, and they were secondary school children. And when we were speaking, I could not believe the varying ideas of what the final act looked like in their head. Some were, thank God, innocently thinking this is what the act is. Some were thinking that unless, it was absolutely completed, there was no act. We are in an age where real definitions are needed. And anyone on the ground will be able to tell you that it's too far-reaching. As I close, Madam President, let me once again thank you and my colleagues for allowing me to contribute to this debate. Adverse sexual experiences can have a lifelong impact on individuals. Our domestic violence rates, our crime rates, our childhood abuse rates, they all stand to prove to us that this bill must be amended through meticulous, humble, open-minded, and cordial dialogue. Our citizens, our society, its potential rapid decay, it depends on us getting this bill right. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to my colleagues.
Before I call on the next speaker, permit me to congratulate Senator Walker on everyone's behalf on her maiden contribution. Senator Richards.